the big motivating factor for why we even developed Unity Catalog internally, I should say, is that we found basically there's a lot of limitations with like the leading open catalog standard, which is Hive Metastore. And so we 4 years ago started developing Unity Catalog internally because we saw that there was like, this emergence. So Databricks is a data and AI company. There's this emergence of, okay, well, it's not just tabular data that you need to think about and that you want to govern, and that has all these attributes that we just talked about, where there's like metadata around the collections of files that we want to actually have governed and cataloged and managed in a unified way. And so that's where Unity Catalog was born of. Actually, each of these, the story behind the logo, by the way, is that each of these shapes represents the like different assets that you can have in Unity Catalog. So it's like
really? Wow,
squares. Yes, I know, right? Actually, it says on the back of the shirt. But squares, it's tables. The triangles is like AI assets, like models and functions, and then this part in the middle. I think the hexagon, is it a hexagon? Or is it it's a hexagon, right? Anyways, the hexagon represents like unstructured data, like volumes. So that's like the genesis behind Unity Catalog. And then, we have over 10,000 customers running Unity Catalog in production. We have built out a lot of those core primitives and APIs that, we feel really confident behind. And so then it felt like the right time to actually go and say, okay, now we're ready to open this up and feel like we have something that's really technically solid here that we know solved a lot of the challenges that we were facing with Hive Metastore.
Yeah, even from the logo, it's bridging structured data and unstructured data, and those SQL analytics and AI applications, right? And I see a lot of this, on the Databricks channels. But probably users are, skeptical, right? So how exactly, this bridge data and AI? So can you give a more of like example or a deeper dive into, how exactly Unity Catalog can do this?
Yeah. So actually, maybe I have some slides here that I can talk through. This is probably a good time to talk through some things. Yeah, I have some slides here that just give an overview of Unity Catalog, and it's just some of like the core principles, and then I have an architecture slide on the next diagram. But first, I'll just give a quick overview. So I think there's 3 sort of core principles behind Unity Catalog. It's a lot of what I've said, but basically embracing multi-format support, right? So the only open catalog out there that supports like any table format, including Delta, Iceberg, Parquet, CSV, JSON, and then also we thought it was really important that it's like a multimodal catalog. So here with multimodal, I mean, it's like a universal catalog for your tabular assets, your unstructured data, like PDFs and images and stuff like that, or audio files and stuff like that, and then AI assets. So you're able to govern and manage all of these things together. And then finally, the essential piece behind Unity Catalog is that it's unified. So you get this like unified view to like discover, govern, do auditing and lineage across your entire data estate. And so a little bit of what this looks like under the hood, although I should say this is like obviously not an actual like services architecture diagram, but a little bit about what the structure looks like is that you have Unity Catalog here. It's exposing these open interfaces, so the Unity REST APIs, the Iceberg REST Catalog APIs as well. In the future, we intend to add Delta sharing as well to the open source Unity Catalog server. But then also, all of these are providing unified governance across all of your different data and AI assets. So these are actually, what the abstractions are called, and the resources are called in Unity Catalog. You have managed tables, external tables. These can be in any format, right, like Iceberg or Delta, as I said. Volumes, which is the abstraction that we use to encapsulate, say, like images, audio, PDF files, and stuff like that. And then also functions and models.
Really useful for unstructured data.
Super useful.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm super excited about seeing more integrations too, like around like volumes, because this is something that I know that our users love on the platform is being able to access these things together, right? Because, so here, I'll give you an example. So say you're using any of these tools that are here in this like any engine up top, this layer up top, right? You have like all these different cloud platforms and tools. You have like these different ML tools, right? Like MLflow or LangChain, and then you have like different compute engines. And so what you might have is you might have like this piece of code, right, that needs to access tabular data. It also needs to go maybe pull some like PDFs or images and stuff like that for training data. And then also maybe you might be like executing a model. And so this is actually like the same user who's needing to do all of these things. And when these are governed or managed in silos, that's when you have things like, like maybe duplicate access policies or other things that can like cause like frustration to users when these things are operating in silos, because you're not getting also an end-to-end picture of like, lineage. Like I used, this version of this data set when I was training this version of this model or something like that. So really excited
exactly.
to like bring all of these together. Yeah.
I think this could be, like really big, the ability to both pull from structured data and unstructured data, right? And I think even for large language models too, right? People use RAG, to enhance, to basically give it a longer context window, right? And those applications are not only, vectors, right? They probably, they need structured and unstructured data together, right? Multimodal search. And, this can be very important, in those kind of applications as well, I think, right? What do you think?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that's actually something that we're really excited about is in the 0.1 release of Unity Catalog, right, we had functions, which can be like SQL or Python functions, which can be leveraged. Actually, you can use Unity Catalog almost as like an AI tool registry or catalog that we actually have already. These are already out there, like integrations with LangChain, for example. So if you're building like a RAG application with LangChain, you can actually go and like leverage functions from Unity Catalog, where you've like registered those functions, the bit of code, some metadata description around it and stuff like that. It's in this nice, right, like 3-level namespace and stuff like that. So you can just reference the function by name, like, I don't know, some numbers or whatever the name is. Summing numbers isn't the best function example, but it's like, all of this with these like really nice abstractions and APIs, you're able to create really powerful applications.
Yeah, that is true. And we talked about AI, right? How Unity Catalog or how Unity Catalog, the open source, can help bridge this gap, right? And I also saw interoperability there. So how, on the first slide, so how can this Unity Catalog open source help with, the table format world and all of the pain that a table format was causing for the users, for our users?
Yeah, no, for sure. So here, I'll refer to this arc diagram again, but I think one of the things that we're excited about with the catalog is that, like I said, there's not that much differences between the formats. Right now, there are still, ultimately our end goal, right, is to converge them, to completely smooth out those differences, but they're going to remain for a while. And there's just this little bit of like metadata translation and stuff like that needs to happen. And so something that we're really excited about with the catalog, so the catalog plays like an important role in Iceberg. It's increasingly playing a super important role for Delta tables as well, right? As like a commit coordinator for like multi-table commits, for managing things like, say even like, branches or whatever of your data sets. And then also, I think also just like, it's the source of truth for writes and commits, and like what's the latest schema, what's the latest table version, what's the metadata file that I should be looking at if I'm an engine, right? If I'm like, the engine needs to go talk to the catalog. And so one of the things that so the role that Unity Catalog can play and is playing for eliminating those differences is just saying, okay, this is the idea behind an API, right? It's an abstraction on top of all that complexity that's underneath. And so Unity Catalog exposes both the Unity REST APIs, right, which gives you access to all these different tabular assets, and then also the Iceberg REST Catalog API, which gives you access to tabular assets. And as an engine, maybe you don't even need to know anymore, like what's the like underlying format or whatever. Unity
That'll be
catalog
a
can
dream come
actually
true.
just like, if you're accessing, you can access any table through the Iceberg REST catalog interface, right? It's an API, and then what we can do is almost like abstract away all that complexity around the different metadata and compatibilities, make
Yeah.
them look like each other, right? And then expose that to the engine. And so that's the role that we see Unity Catalog playing, is basically being this like amazing like interoperability layer between all of these different formats.
Yeah, that is terrific, and that is at least from a query engine or compute engine perspective, this is going to make us and our lives so much easier.
Yeah,
And the
you
users as
shouldn't have
well.
to know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to know, and there is only one integration that we need to build, right? And then that's going to enhance, for us to push the boundary even further, right? Because there's less work, less manual work we need to do, right? And with everybody on board, right, almost. And do you believe the open lakehouse architecture, where it is now, the architectural wise, is gonna has all of the necessary components, right? Do you expect any big change in the future? And which component in the lakehouse architecture is going to be the key moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like where we are, so I mentioned like the major components. The major components are all there, which is you have the open like storage table formats, you have the catalog, and then you have the engine ecosystem. I guess basically what we just talked about here. And I think like what is sort of next for this open lakehouse is we're going to see a lot more emergence around the standards for like AI and ML and these unstructured data assets. There's like so much rich ground there that like we have barely scratched the surface of. And Unity Catalog is basically one of the first open catalogs, I think, that like really provide this like the Unity REST APIs across all of these objects. And so I think what we're going to see is or bringing all the great things that we did for like say like table formats with like Delta, right? This like metadata around like tabular data. You're going to see things like metadata for like volumes and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
for functions like this AI tool registry, like all these basically emergent applications that we're going to see.
yeah,
So that's like one prediction. And then I think the other thing too is that the other prediction is that as an industry, we're also going to converge around like what I said, this like interoperability between catalogs and the shared language. So I think we're going to converge around like basically a shared language for this like open catalog standard for how we work with each other, so that we don't get. I mentioned table format silos before. What we don't want is like like we're already seeing this happen, is like metadata silos in the catalog, and
yeah.
we don't want that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, in the future, right, with everything on the open format now, for us, specifically focus on the compute, right? We are a kind of like CelerData is a specialized tool from the beginning, right? But that makes it kind of difficult, right, without open formats, because, that require a specific vendor specific kind of format. You have to ingest it, right? And that creates a lot of trouble, right? And with open formats with this kind of capabilities, it's just like a data warehouse. It makes it so much easier, right? And also, I think this is great also for compute. One of the reasons is that you guys basically, working on formats and working on catalog, and basically make it frictionless for users to switch solutions, right, on the compute side, right? And this definitely sparks innovation, and because it's gonna make the competition a lot more, right? Then whether you have to ingest, right? So I think this is great for kind of new projects to emerge on the compute side, right?
Oh,
And I think,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. And specifically, I mean, I think this is also great for specialized tools, right? Before, I mean, you have a monolithic solution, right, with a proprietary format and a query engine on top that only works with that proprietary format. Whether it's storage compute coupled or decoupled or not, that doesn't matter, but it's one solution, right? But now you're able to have multiple computes on top of one copy of data, a single source of truth of data. And that is great for specialized tools, right? Now you can have something like Spark, for machine learning, and for those batch, processing job that runs for like hours, right? ETL workloads. And you can have, machine learning or machine learning applications that also run on that piece of data. And you can have, that SQL query engine that specializes in interactive, low latency, high concurrency workloads like CelerData, right? And I think it pushed the boundary even further, in terms of what analytics is going to be capable of, right? Because we're going to have so much more specialized tools that is going to work in this architecture, right? And I think this is great, right? We talked a lot about table formats, catalog service, and even compute engines, right? And actually, all of those technologies that are there that we talked about, all the theories, that they actually work today, right? And we actually have a few demos that we can show, right? So, Michelle, you can share your screen if you have anything.
Oh, you want me to go first? I think.
Yep.
Well, so I'm here. We have a couple demos, right? I think you said you're going to demo some of the stuff with like query engines, right? Working with tables. I have a demo. So one of the things that I'm really excited about. So we had the Unity Catalog 0.2 release. I have a demo for something that I'm really excited about that we added 0.2. By the way, if we'll throw up the links after the end of this webinar, but folks who are interested should check out the latest release notes. We like packed it chock full of things. There's a new Unity Catalog UI, added identity, authentication, authorization, like grants, privileges, and then something that we also added was the Spark integration, and then also we added models, so register models to Unity Catalog, so you can use open source Unity Catalog as a model registry as well with, say, for example, like MLflow models. So the demo that I have is, I'll show you, I'll give a quick spin just through the Unity UI and then also show working with models in MLflow. So let's see if I can get all of this working. I just prepared it earlier this morning. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, you can share a screen.
Yes, I'm working on it. Okay, cool. So I have no idea. Can people see my screen? Does this look right, Sida? Are you able to see the UI? No.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes, I can see it.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, good. I was like, okay, wait, I'm stressing. I hope no one's looking at my private messages right now. Okay. Cool. Okay, so here's a little bit of the new Unity Catalog UI. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger for folks to be able to see. So I set up, so this is like the default catalog. So Unity, I should say, has a 3-level namespace. So the top level is called a catalog, second level is like a schema, and then also you have the objects that are within the schema. And so here's the different objects that you can have inside this schema. So this is some of the defaults that already come out of the box if you just follow the Unity Catalog quick start, right? So maybe you have some tables, you have some JSON files or some text files that are in volumes, right? And then also functions, and then also models, except I don't have any models right now. So one of the things that I'm going to demo is working with MLflow. So this is the MLflow UI, which I got set up here, working with MLflow with Unity Catalog. So I realize I'm saying a lot of concepts here. I'm going to start with saying MLflow, it's another project that we open sourced and maintain here at Databricks. There's this concept of like MLflow models. It's just a way to package up models and then be able to go and run and deploy them on things like Azure ML, on Databricks, of course, and on Kubernetes, or even run them as user-defined functions in Spark. And then one of the things that's really cool is it has this concept of like a model registry. We're able to track the like models and maybe like different versions of the models that you might have been training and stuff like that. And then Unity Catalog we also have, so Unity Catalog can basically act as a model registry with the MLflow integration. So Unity Catalog has this concept of registered models. So you see I don't have any right now. And then also model versions. And so Unity Catalog in concert with MLflow can act as a model registry. And then I should say that like bringing all these concepts together, right, you can see how powerful it is to have all of this discoverable and governed in one place, where you have models which are probably working with, data that is in volumes, data that might be in your tables. Maybe you have a bunch of like customer review text, product review text and stuff like that. And maybe you also have a bunch of like product images and stuff like that. And then you want to go and be able to do some like AI with that in your models. And then, even later, getting really fancy, be able to like execute, predictive models and stuff like that in functions. So all of this, it's all discoverable in one place. And so this is the open source UI. So what the quick demo I set up, I mean, it's really simple actually. So you can see I just have some code here, which just like basically does a small, I'm going to train a small model and then register it in Unity Catalog. So hopefully everything is still running. I'm just basically just going to run this demo script. And then if all goes well, what we'll see is that I should have a model that is now registered in Unity Catalog named Iris. Great, here it is. And so you can see also there's a, well, if I refresh this, there should be a demo run 15 seconds ago, of the model. So we just trained a small model. You click into it, you can see that there's a version here, right? So this is the first model training run. So say maybe what I do is I want to like train it again. Maybe I made some tweaks to the training data set. And then what you can also do is you'll see here, so I'm just going to train another version of the model basically. So what we should see is that now there's actually a second version of the model that's registered here. And so all of this, I should say, one thing that's really cool is this is also all with unified governance. So models are actually just like a collection of files under the hood. And just like volumes and just like tables in your data lake, all of these things are just in directories in object storage. And so Unity Catalog with like credential vending can actually, govern and create unified access control for all of these concepts all together in one place. So that was a quick demo showing a few of those concepts. And you can find all of the stuff for this documentation and stuff like that on unitycatalog.io.
Yeah, that is
Okay.
beautiful. I mean, yeah, basically showcase, data and AI can be governed together, right? With credential vending, and we can get, the appropriate authorizations and to, do all of those and have one place, with all of the credentials and access control get governed. And that's great. That's great for user, right? And, you focus a little more on the AI side, right? And here I want to show a very small demo that it's more focused on the SQL side with table formats and interoperability, right? And here we're going to use CelerData Cloud BYOC. So it is a managed version of commercial managed version of StarRocks, which is a Lakehouse query engine, right? It specializes in low latency, high concurrency, customer facing like workloads, right? So this is a CelerData site. You can go take a visit. Basically, you don't need a data warehouse, right? Because you can run all of the crazy workloads on your Lakehouse, on your open and standardized table and file formats, right? And so here I want to showcase Unity Catalog and CelerData, right? So very simple demo that's based on the open source version of Unity Catalog, right? CelerData Cloud BYOC has integration with all sorts of table formats and catalog services, right? So the first one I'm going to use to connect Unity Catalog open source is actually not a connector we built specifically for the open source version of Unity Catalog. This was actually built like way before Unity Catalog was open source, right? This was built for the Databricks managed version of Unity Catalog, but it also works with the open source, right? So it's actually compatible, the two. So I already created the external catalog here. It's called UC, right? So this one, it's connecting to a Unity Catalog open source version that's deployed locally, right? on this machine, right? And here we can just show the databases from Unity catalog, right? And we can see the default one, which is kind of the quick start database that comes with every single Unity Cloud open source installment, right? And then we can show tables from this UC from this database, and then we can query the data, right? So this basically showcases, the open source version of Unity Catalog actually is compatible with, its Databricks managed counterpart, right? And the second short demo I'm going to show is actually we don't use any proprietary or UC Unity Catalog specific client, right? Here we're actually going to use the Iceberg REST client of CelerData Cloud BYOC and see if we can still, connect to the same, to the same data that's stored and managed, governed by Unity Catalog, right? And here I already created this catalog, external catalog, right? And we can set the catalog to this UC REST, and we can still read the data. But how, right? And this is actually through Unity Catalog's uniform, right? So we're actually reading the data from Unity Catalog as it was Iceberg data, right? And this showcase, the capability, like the interoperability that you can experience today, with a Lakehouse architecture, right? And this integration is available at the Unity Catalog GitHub site. Just right here, you go to docs and integrations, and you can see CelerData here, right? And you can try it for yourself. And you can sign up CelerData Cloud BYOC and get a 30-day free trial and try all of that today. Okay, and that's all for my demo.